What does it mean when an empire as vast, proud, and iron-fisted as Rome decides that an entire city, with its people, its language, its science, and its identity, must be erased so thoroughly that even its ruins must be buried under the desert itself? And what level of threat forces the world's greatest military machine to wage a war not against armies, but against a civilization's memory? There lies a forbidden question few historians dare articulate out loud. What if the most advanced culture Rome annihilated was not in Europe, not in the Middle East, but in the deep Sahara, a place Rome insisted was empty, uncivilized, and incapable of technological brilliance? Yet every fragment of evidence whispers the opposite. Scattered beneath dunes older than the empire that feared them lie the bones of the Garamantes, a desert civilization the Romans described as barbarians, yet whose ruins reveal systems more advanced than many of Rome's frontier settlements. And though official Roman archives mention their existence, they do so with a reluctance, as if recording them was dangerous. Some ancient writers even hint that Rome defeated them only after discovering something it could not allow to survive. And that is where the investigation begins. Everything publicly known about the Garamantes paints a simple picture. Nomads who settled into oasis towns, daring raiders who troubled Roman outposts, clever desert dwellers who built underground channels called fogaras to bring water from deep aquifers. This is the sanitized version, the one safe enough to place in history books. But every vanished culture leaves contradictions, and far beyond official descriptions lies another archive, the archaeological record. And in that archive, the story sharpens. Stone fortresses where nomads should not have had the resources to build them. Metallurgical workshops in a place Rome expected dust and spears. And a network of subterranean water channels stretching thousands of kilometers. Engineering so precise it rivals aqueduct systems from around the world. The paradox grows darker. How could a desert civilization the Romans called primitive build a technological marvel that still lies operational beneath the dunes? And why does every Roman reference to them drip with fear, dismissal, and an urgency to destroy? The accepted narrative describes the Garamantes as merely troublesome raiders, but the contradictory fragments, the kind that survive only in damaged scrolls, hostile commentary, or half-erased inscriptions, reveal a possibility uncomfortable for mainstream history. What if Rome did not defeat them because they were weak, but because they were becoming powerful? And what if their destruction was less a victory and more an act of erasing a rival narrative of civilization? The investigation must begin where the sands refuse to stay silent. In the ruins of Germa, the ancient Garamantes capital, now surrounded by collapsing fogaras whose openings breathe out the cool air of a vanished world. Wind drags fine sand across stone blocks engraved in symbols Rome never cared to decipher. Fragmented pottery still bears traces of symbols that resemble nothing from the Mediterranean. Geometric shapes, celestial diagrams, and patterns that scholars argue may be ritualistic calendars or encoded maps. A contradiction emerges immediately. Rome claimed the Garamantes were incapable of organized statecraft, yet the layout of Germa reflects deliberate planning. Districts divided by social function, evidence of metal refining quarters, and traces of imported goods from Carthage, Nubia, Egypt, and even possible links to sub-Saharan trade networks. Rome said the Garamantes were isolated. The ruins say the opposite. Rome said they were nomadic vagrants. The archaeological strata reflect centuries of stable urban life. Rome said they posed no real political threat. But three separate Roman writers, Tacitus, Pliny, and Strabo, mention them with unease, sometimes contempt, sometimes mockery, but never indifference. Mockery in ancient political language is often camouflage for fear. One of the most puzzling contradictions lies in an unassuming text fragment often overlooked, a damaged passage within Cassius Dio's Roman history suggesting a campaign led by Cornelius Balbus against deep Saharan settlements, where he describes cities hidden in the sands, built by those who should not have known how. Those who should not have known how. Even in its fragmented form, the statement drips with institutional discomfort. It suggests the Garamantes were building something Rome did not expect, something Rome did not want to acknowledge, something Rome wanted gone. At this early stage of the investigation, two opposing theories collide. The first, the conservative academic stance claims the Garamantes were simply efficient desert raiders, using the underground channels to sustain moderate farming and water supply. Their technology was impressive, but not revolutionary. The Roman campaign against them was targeted, limited, and mainly intended to suppress raids. The second, whispered in fringe archaeological circles, pulled from lesser-known inscriptions and imperial administrative notes, hints at a much more unsettling picture. A civilization evolving rapidly, technologically and politically, enough to destabilize Roman control in North Africa. The pendulum of interpretation swings between these extremes. One reading paints the Garamantes as desperate survivors in an unforgiving environment. Another paints them as an emergent power whose knowledge of the desert allowed them to circumvent Roman surveillance, taxation, and military pressure. The Fogaras sit at the center of this debate. These subterranean tunnels, stretching from aquifers miles away into Garamantian cities, carved with a precision that still confounds engineers, create a forbidden curiosity puzzle. How did a primitive people engineer something so advanced that even satellite imaging today traces their network like the veins of a living organism? And why does every Roman mention of the Fogaras avoid describing their engineering details, describing them only as mysterious wells? If Rome did not understand them, that alone would be unusual. But if Rome understood them and chose to suppress the knowledge, the implications become politically dangerous. One theory argues that if the Garamantes irrigated the Sahara with underground channels, they may have controlled oasis networks Rome relied on for desert expeditions. If so, Rome would have regarded them not as nomads, but as gatekeepers of the Sahara. And there is no empire more threatened than one confronted with a rival that controls a landscape it assumes belongs to it. Yet the water tunnels are only the beginning. Evidence from burial sites contradicts Roman descriptions of the Garamantes as culturally simplistic. The graves contain jewelry of mixed origins, locally forged tools of surprising quality, and even remnants of imported luxuries. This suggests a society with economic reach and sophisticated social stratification. One particularly controversial find, a bronze plaque with patterns resembling early astronomical diagrams, has fueled speculation that the Garamantes were mapping star positions to time water distribution, agricultural cycles, or long-distance travel. To mainstream scholarship, such claims border on exaggeration. To others, they demonstrate why Rome felt the need to classify the Garamantes as unworthy of civilization. The deeper the investigation goes, the more Rome's narrative collapses. Rome claimed the Garamantes had no written language, yet symbols recur across ceramics, walls, and even on funerary stones, suggesting a proto-script or ritual notation. Rome claimed they lacked advanced weaponry, but arrowheads and metal fragments show influences from Berber metallurgy and possibly Nubian trade. Rome claimed the Garamantes could not organize politically, but their city planning, trade networks and irrigation system imply otherwise. At a certain point, the contradictions stop being coincidence and start forming a pattern. Is this the pattern of a civilization Rome underestimated? Or the pattern of a civilization Rome deliberately erased? Another clue emerges from a lesser-known Roman administrative record found in Cyrene, describing Garamantian rebels as those who move as shadows under the earth. Scholars interpret this as a poetic reference to their fogaras, but the phrasing may carry a darker implication, that the Romans viewed the underground channels as hiding places or even tactical routes. If the Garamantes used their tunnels for strategic mobility, Rome would have faced an enemy capable of appearing and vanishing across desert landscapes with precision. A desert enemy who could never be fully conquered unless the tunnels were destroyed. And that's precisely what later Roman campaigns appear to have aimed at, not defeating armies, but dismantling infrastructure. A civilization is never truly erased by killing its warriors. It is erased by smashing the pillars that sustain it. When the Romans reached Garamantian territories during certain campaigns, they burned fields, filled tunnels, and collapsed wells. An unusually thorough approach compared to typical Roman punitive actions. Rome typically annexed or enslaved, but here, Rome dismantled, erased, buried. A rare troubling pattern. This level of destruction suggests the Garamantes were not merely raiders, but a threat to Roman imperial stability. Politically, economically, or symbolically, the question becomes forbidden. What did the Garamantes possess that Rome found threatening enough to hide? Conflicting theories intertwine. Some argue it was the fogaras, advanced engineering that Rome did not want disseminated. Others argue it was trade routes connecting Mediterranean empires to sub-Saharan ones, routes Rome could not control. Some fringe voices suggest the Garamantes held knowledge of desert navigation Rome could not match. Others claim their cultural independence itself was dangerous. A sophisticated non-Mediterranean civilization flourishing outside Rome's influence. But the most controversial theory, the one whispered in archaeological circles but seldom spoken publicly, is that the Garamantes were developing into a regional power that could challenge Roman narratives of superiority. And if there is one thing more fragile than an empire's borders, it is an empire's mythology. If Rome admitted the Sahara housed a flourishing civilization with technology Rome itself could not replicate, the empire's propaganda, declaring Rome as the singular civilizing force, would fracture. To maintain dominance, Rome needed the Garamantes to be remembered as insignificant, and so they became insignificant, not through natural decline, but through a controlled narrative. Yet the desert is indifferent to Rome's narrative, and the fragments the sands preserved contradict everything Rome insisted upon. More inscriptions are discovered showing organized clan systems. Metalworking sites reveal specialized craftsmanship. Foreign artifacts show active trade networks. Remains of fortifications reveal strategic defense planning. Each reveals a new layer of a civilization Rome tried to flatten. And then comes the most disturbing contradiction of all, a set of funerary stones bearing symbols the Romans despised, symbols of sovereignty, autonomy, and identity, names scratched out, symbols chiseled away, entire stones defaced, as if someone attempted to erase not just a person, but a lineage. Such erasure is political. Such erasure is deliberate. It suggests an attempt not merely to defeat, but to unwrite. The pendulum swings again. Was this erasure ordered by Rome, or executed later by regional competitors? Were the Garamantes victims of imperial propaganda, or collateral damage in larger desert conflicts? Were they annihilated for what they were, or for what they were becoming? The answers hide in the Fogaras, the civilization's lifelines. As the underground channels collapse today, engineers attempting to study them find something unsettling. The layout suggests long-term planning, maintenance systems, and a mastery of groundwater dynamics far beyond anything Rome understood inside the Sahara. Some parts of the tunnels are impossible to date accurately, suggesting generational knowledge passed down in ways no Roman document ever acknowledged. And here emerges the heaviest forbidden curiosity question. What if the Garamantes possessed environmental knowledge Rome wanted control over? And when it couldn't seize that knowledge, it chose to erase it? Historical records often glorify Roman expansion, but Rome feared unpredictability, especially in regions where its legions struggled. A people who controlled underground water in the Sahara would be unpredictable, independent, unmanageable. Empires destroy what they cannot control. But while empires erase, landscapes remember. Satellite imagery today uncovers the veins of the Garamantes like the ghost of a lost body. Thousands of Fogara lines stretching to horizons the Romans never charted. The desert carries the outline of a civilization that refused to stay buried. Rome could silence archives, but it could not silence geology. Rome could dismiss the Garamantes, but it could not erase their infrastructure. Rome could mock them, but it could not match their desert mastery. And so the contradictions remain. Like bruises on the historical record, a civilization Rome declared barbaric left behind engineering Rome could not replicate, a people Rome called irrelevant constructed cities Rome tried to hide, a society Rome called primitive shaped the desert in ways Rome never understood. What truth lies behind Rome's erasure? What story hides beneath the sand? What civilization was the world never meant to see? The forbidden fragments are all that remain. A destroyed city, collapsed tunnels, scratched inscriptions, abandoned fortresses, and imperial records that speak of an enemy Rome feared but refused to name honestly. Whether these pieces form a forgotten truth or only the scattered echoes of a world erased by empire is for each viewer to decide. And if uncovering forbidden histories and suppressed civilizations calls to you, explore further with Noetera, Worlds Within Worlds, and stories history tried to bury. Subscribe, stay curious, and continue the investigation.